Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A very warm welcome to you all to today's episode of Keys, our monthly broadcast to our clients around the world. And a particularly warm welcome to any of you who tried to be with us earlier today. We did have a major meltdown of our software that we use for the webinars. So I'm really pleased to have you with us this afternoon. Technology will be one of the things we're covering today. And so it has been such a year. It's our last webinar, and we're trying to reflect on what we've experienced, what we learned, and what might happen next as we look to 2025. If we think about the year just gone, one of the things we've been noticing is how the public really went into the new year with their eyes wide open. About 12 months ago, we were asking them for their views. Just 31% said that the war in Ukraine would end. Of course, we're now into its over 1000th day of that conflict. We went into this year with a consensus that it would again be the hottest year on record, which is exactly what we went through. And we also went into the year with people expecting pressures on their cost of living. And certainly they've been telling us throughout this year in countries around the world about how tough they're finding it. We'll touch on that a little bit later on. Thinking about 2024 and moving forward 12 months to now, we have been asking people again to reflect this time on 2024 and indeed to look to the year ahead. And as they think about 2024 in our new survey, 33 countries, so you can look at your own country to follow up after the webinar, they're telling us a number of things. When they think about their lives, they're telling us that it was a bad year for them and their family. But that figure is down on where we were during COVID times. And we also see people with something of an optimistic streak as well, that next year will be better than this year. And we see that also when we ask people to think a bit more broadly about their world or their country. They say, for example, that this year was a bad year for their country. 2/3 say that. By the way, it was 90%. In that terrible COVID year of 2020. So things are coming back to normal, but often when people are looking back, they think things weren't so good. But again, as they look ahead, 52% say people in their country will start to feel more optimistic about the long-term future. We'll see how they feel as next year takes shape. And then, of course, when we think about the world, we have huge issues, huge geopolitical conflicts and fractures to think about. 80% of people tell us that the world has become more dangerous. That's actually down a little bit on this time last year, and that's a fairly normal state of affairs in terms of people's mindsets on this type of study. But we also find, amidst all of the problems that we face, that globalization is good for my country is the view of nearly 2 in 3 of us, and that figure has actually been rising in many countries over the decade. So lots of inconsistencies, connections to make, and we're going to be looking at that with our speakers as we go through today's webinar. I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but just to say, if you have questions, we would love to hear from you. By the virtues of new technology, we'll be taking them and I'll be posing them to our panel as we go through. We'll also be making the slides. If you like slides and PowerPoint, that's going to be made available to you after the webinar as well. So just to introduce my wonderful panel who are with us today to help us think about where we've been and where we're going. We have Daryl, who is going to help us understand a little bit more about the year of elections that we've just witnessed. We then got, Daryl's in Toronto today, by the way. We then have Jackie, who isn't normally in London, but she is today. She's going to help us think through what the new GLP-1 drugs mean for all of us. Then we're going to be thinking about AI and how it's taken center stage with Ajay, who's in Kuala Lumpur, where it's getting rather late. So thank you for being with us, Ajay. And it's also getting rather late in China. And Patrick, warm welcome back to the Keys stage to share your perspectives on 2024 in China. But without further ado, it is time to reflect on this mega year of elections, and who better to do that than Daryl, who has been observing them with his eagle eye. Daryl, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. And yes, this year was a very big year for elections. So typically in any year, we see to about maybe 50 to 60 national elections. In 2024, there were 100 or more national elections involving half of the world's population. So this was the biggest election year in history. And to put it into some sort of a context, I really like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When people look at elections, they're not in isolation. They're not specifically about what people think of their individual parties and leaders or candidates. They're really in the context of what's going on in their lives. Self-actualization at the top of the chart really is about making the world a better place. And then you move down to the bottom of the chart where it's really about just trying to get by from day-to-day survival. This year, or actually I should go back to 2019, people were more focused on the top of the chart. It was about making the world a better place, making a better future. So for example, issues like climate change tend to play more into the mindset of the conversation that was happening in democracies. People were more worried about these bigger world issues. Today, in the elections that we've been going through in 2024, our gaze has moved down the chart. And we're really thinking more about me and mine and just making it to the next month. People's sense of the long term is no longer a decade, it's 30 days. And the world that they're looking at is really more focused today on their own personal situation and the situation of the people who are closest to them. Now, I should say, in general, the public has not really thought that things were on the right track in their country anytime since November of 2014. So it's fairly typical that people are angsty about the situation that they exist in. The one time when we actually saw these two lines, the red line being the negative line, wrong track, the green line being the positive line, is when we were initially dealing with the issue of COVID, when people were somewhat rallying to their national institutions as they were trying to get past the situation. But since that point, it really has not gotten any better. And when you take a look at individual countries, and you'll be getting the charts afterwards so you can go and find your specific country, there's very few countries in the world that actually think that things are headed on the right track. So 62% on average in November think it's on the wrong track. And almost every country you can go to, they do believe their country is on the wrong track. And 3 countries that have experienced recent elections are among the ones that are the least optimistic about how things are going right now, or the least optimistic, maybe more optimistic about the future, but not satisfied with the current situation. So the US, 65% saying that we're on the wrong track. Great Britain, 70%. By the way, this was after the election in Great Britain. And France, 82% of the population saying that they're on the wrong track. All of this suggests situations that are ripe for change. And when we look at the specific issues that are driving what people are thinking, specifically what's driving that context that they're living in, 2 big lines to focus on here. I know it looks like a plate of spaghetti, but I'll explain it and it'll be really obvious for you. So there's a line that starts back in November of 2013, and it's a dark line, and it goes all the way along at a fairly low level and then pops up around November 2021, and then comes down a little bit near the end of the chart. That's inflation. And then there's a red line. That's the coronavirus. That's COVID. So these are the percentage of people that say that this is one of the top 3 issues facing their country at that time. So what's happened is we've gone through 2 big crises in the minds of the public. One was the coronavirus, which has kind of gone away. The other one is inflation, or what real people call the cost of living, the cost of me getting by from day to day, that took over from the coronavirus and became a global crisis. And now that's coming back down. And what you can see is the lines are coming together closer on the right-hand side of the chart. That's because individual countries now have their own top issues. There's not one thing that's dominating the public agenda anymore. And you can see that in this chart. Crime and violence, inflation, poverty, social inequality, and unemployment dominate the chart. And what all of these issues have in common are they are things that affect the individual. I'm worried about my own personal safety. the personal safety of my family and my friends, my cost of living, how that's affecting me, poverty and social inequality, if I see it around where I'm living or I could potentially experience in it, and unemployment, whether or not I have secure employment. Look down the chart to see where climate change is. We're only 17% naming it as a top 3 issue. That's something that's come down. That's about making the world a better place in the longer term. People are more focused on the personal and the short term at the moment. But this all gets to my friend here, Mr. Tolstoy, in his book Anna Karenina, and when she talked about all happy families are happy in the same way, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's how the book starts. And that really does describe what's going on in the world today. It's not one issue that's driving everything and what's happening in terms of election campaigns. It's many, and it's a hyper-local kind of a situation that adds up into an overall environment of change. So this is a chart from the Financial Times. And it shows that since 1950, this is the first year in which we've seen more incumbent governments defeated, and even incumbent governments that weren't defeated, reducing their level of popular support in the election campaign. So there is a massive, massive trend to change that we're seeing in the world right now. If you're an incumbent government, you've got problems. And we're seeing this everywhere. People want change. They don't like the direction of what's happening in their country. They want something different than what they've been receiving. So what does this add up to? What to watch for? This huge appetite for change is going to create an environment in which we're going to see ongoing political instability in the democracies, but probably in other places too. We've seen in the democracies the rise of nationalist, populist political options that are really pushing out the centrist governing elites. The centrist coalitions, particularly since the end of the Second World War in places like Europe or the United States or my home country in Canada, the Laurentian consensus, those things are breaking down, and we're starting to see the more extreme options emerge. Particularly powerful at the moment, options on the right, but there's also options on the left that are emerging. We're seeing a focus on shorter term domestic issues. The long term is next month. And general dissatisfaction with the functioning of government. So when the world's richest man, Elon Musk, talks about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that's not a message that just has resonance in the United States. It has a resonance in a lot of places where people feel that the government isn't working on their behalf. Underpinning all of this is a huge demographic transition that's going on in the world, in which fertility rates have collapsed. Our population is rapidly aging, and we're starting to see emerging generational conflict. Some of these more emphatic reactions and desires for change are coming from our younger generations. That's a new development. We haven't really seen that in quite a long time, probably since back to the 1960s. So that's something to really watch. The push for change that's coming from our emerging younger generations as they're pushing against an aging population and the costs of paying for that aging population. So Simon, that's what the world looks like in terms of elections. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And Daryl, that chart from the Financial Times about the kicking that people are giving to incumbents, that is, I mean, almost like one of the charts of the year. And one of the things that you're seeing, as you know, is happening across countries. I had a question from one of our viewers about turnouts, and I'm conscious that varies from country to country, but are we seeing any patterns there in terms of people becoming more or less likely to participate?
Yeah, we actually are seeing turnout generally increasing in instances in which change is on the agenda. So in the French election, we saw turnout go up. In the English election, not so much, probably because the Tories were so far behind that they just knew that change was going to be happening. In the United States, turnout was down a little bit, but generally speaking, what we see is that there's kind of a bandwagon effect. People want to get on board with change, and we're seeing turnout go up in some elections. And it really is the question, it's pretty easy to predict how a person's going to vote. It's not always easy to predict who's actually going to turn up to vote. So this is a problem that pollsters struggle with, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that people have about polls if we have them later on.
Lovely, thank you. Yes, and as Daryl said, please put any questions in the chat box, and we've got time at the end to come back to any questions you have for our speakers. So I think that's almost story number one of the year, the elections. Story number two is the GLP-1 drugs, and Jackie is going to help us let's say, go on a tour. And I think one of the big points that I've taken from this is, Jackie, is that this is not simply a story for the pharmaceutical industry. This is a story for all of us. Jackie, over to you.
Absolutely right. And thanks, Simon, so much. So yeah, we are talking about revolutionizing healthcare with GLP-1s, but we're really reshaping society. And it's going to impact so many different industries. And that's the story I'm going to tell. But I want to start by talking about obesity. Obesity is a global health crisis. There's over 1 billion people worldwide who are living with obesity, and 4 in 10 Americans. And that's expected to increase to 51% by 2035. But what a lot of people don't know about obesity is how many very other serious health conditions are associated with obesity. So talking about the GLP-1s, most people probably heard of them when they saw all these celebrities losing weight at a very rapid rate. But they've been around since 2017. They're not new. They were approved for diabetes, and then they were found to cause weight loss. And that's not dissimilar to what happens with many other drugs. And the most notable example is probably Viagra, which was initially indicated for cardiovascular disease and then was found to be effective in erectile dysfunction, which is what it's more known for today. But right now, we only have 2 treatments on the market, 2 GLP-1s, but there are nearly 100 in development from 25 pharmaceutical manufacturers. So you can see what's to come. So public perception is shifting, but we're not there yet. Obesity's been around for a long time, but it's not always been recognized as the disease that it is. In our GLP-1 consumer monitor, 70% of consumers are now aware that obesity is a healthcare condition that requires medical intervention. And over 30% of the people, though, that are on GLP-1s or anti-obesity agents still feel stigmatized. They still feel stereotyped as not having enough willpower or doing what it takes to lose weight. The threat of obesity-related diseases, however, it can't be understated or underestimated. And I want to just focus on 2 right now. Hypertension is a prime example. There are 1 billion people who are diagnosed with hypertension, and 65% of those cases are related to obesity. But hypertension is also linked to so many other serious diseases. Hypertension can lead to chronic kidney disease, kidney failure, or severe cardiac events. There are 13 different cancers that are associated with obesity. The cost of treating cancer on average is $150,000. Now imagine a world where you can start to prevent some of these hypertension cases and some of these cancer cases, and think about what that does to the healthcare market. And that's how the healthcare market will be revolutionized. But not everybody is eligible or has access to GLP-1s. So right now, GLP-1s are indicated for obesity, for people who are overweight with 1 additional comorbid condition, and for type 2 diabetes. That equates to 125 million people in the United States, but they're not all eligible. In our GLP-1 consumer monitor, we've seen that only between 30 and 40% of health insurers are covering GLP-1s. And many people are paying out of pocket to access these. Now, there are solutions in place. First, there was a big manufacturing issue in the beginning. 2 products out there, a lot of demand. I think Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk have done a great job fixing the manufacturing issues and also bringing the cost down. But there's other compound pharmacies, companies like Hims and Hers, Ro.com, who can get access to these drugs or compounded version of these drugs for a much lower cost. But really, what is the solution? The solution really has to come down to governments, right? So if we look at the UK and we look at NICE, NICE will approve the GLP-1s for obese individuals for up to 2 years. But when you think about the cost of all of the conditions that are related to obesity, and I haven't even covered half of them yet, and you think of the cost of treating that patient, the government should come in and start reimbursing these drugs. So what's the experience? Oh, my what's the experience with the consumers with GLP-1s? Well, the people that are using them, they say they work. They're effective in losing weight, but there are concerns. One of the concerns we talked about is cost. There's also side effects. Most of them are gastrointestinal and easy to treat, but there's some more severe side effects that cause people to discontinue use. There's also a big concern with anxiety over regaining weight. And lastly, you know, a lot of people base their social life around having a nice meal out, having drinks with friends. And we're seeing that people who are taking GLP-1s, they don't get the same enjoyment out of food or out of drinking that they used to. And so it is impacting their lifestyle, and that is causing them to discontinue taking these drugs. But again, this is a story that's so far beyond healthcare. So we talked about where the GLP-1s are indicated right now, but they are going to be indicated in so many other disease areas. They're going to be indicated in liver disease, likely in chronic kidney disease, in congestive heart failure, in addiction. They're being looked at in Alzheimer's disease, and the list goes on and on and on. So you can imagine how many more people will be taking GLP-1s, and they're not going to be taking them for obesity, but they will have reduced cravings, they will lose weight, and they will change their consumption habits. Their food preferences, alcohol preferences, they will change as well. So regardless of whether you're a healthcare company, a food and beverage company, a retailer, so many sectors, you really need to be thinking about this growing segment of the population. And just to talk about a few of them, the food and beverage industry. I already talked about how people have changes in the things that they like to eat. They have changes in the amount of food that they can eat. And we're already seeing some companies like Nestle, who's created a line extension of their foods called Vital Pursuits, which is for GLP-1 users. And it helps to replace some of the nutrients that they lose by not eating, that people lose when they're not eating quite as much. We're also seeing, alcohol consumption change. In the retail industry or the clothing manufacturer, we see people who are losing weight going down in sizes rapidly. There's companies already out there that are really well positioned for this. Khloe Kardashian's Good American clothing line has True Fit jeans. These have been out for years. This is not about GLP-1s, but those jeans go up and down in size. 4 sizes. So if you think about that, they're ideally placed for GLP-1 users. And then there's skincare. Many people might have heard of Ozempic face. Ozempic face has nothing to do with Ozempic. It has to do with what happens to your skin if you lose weight at a rapid rate. Your skin starts to sag. And there are so many companies out there that have skin tightening and skin firming creams that are already really well positioned to talk to this new growing consumer segment. And beyond that, there's even more. There's the airline industry who's looking at what does it mean for fuel consumption if the weight of people on planes is less? What does it mean for the seat configurations? Healthcare apps like Noom or gyms need to be interested in what's going to happen with exercise and diet for GLP-1 users. So regardless of what sector you're in, you need to be thinking about 3 questions. First, you need to understand and be able to forecast what's going to happen with consumption habits of this changing and growing consumer population. You also need to be thinking about innovating. How do I innovate my products for this growing consumer population? And lastly, how do I position and message to these people? And so the question that you need to ask yourself is, are you ready? Because the future is now. Thank you very much, Simon.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for that expert tour of the territory. We're already getting a number of questions coming through. I'm just going to ask you about this "are you ready" point. Are governments and regulators ready? I suppose that's one question. As you mentioned, 100 in preparation as they get rolled out. Are they going to be able to cope with this demand?
Well, I think there's 100 drugs in development now. Not all of those will be approved, right? Mm-hmm. So with the 2 drugs that are out there right now, if as all these new indications come on, it's going to be hard to supply for all of the new patients that would be eligible for them. But as more drugs become available, and there'll be oral drugs as well as the IV drugs, access will be better. But then it's up to governments to really think about, how are we going to cover these drugs? And it goes back to my point about not looking at the cost of the drugs, which are expensive on their own, but looking at the cost of treating that patient who develops all of these different comorbid conditions as life goes on. I mean, Daryl was just talking about the aging population. A lot of these indications that are linked to obesity that can be helped by GLP-1s are occurring in the aging population. So I think the governments need to be getting ready, and I think they are getting ready. We're seeing that. I mean, they're available now in some of the main markets, but still some of the middle, lower income level countries, we're not seeing these drugs approved yet.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for that. We're going to come back to you with some more questions before we finish, but still on our "Are you ready?" theme. Actually, it connects us with the next presentation, because one thing many of us will be doing, whichever organisation we're working for, is trying to be ready and trying to apply some of the new power, new potential. Not so much of drugs this time, although some might call it a drug, of generative AI. Now, Ajay, you've been working on this. These projects at the AI face, if I can call it that, this year. Tell us what you found as AI has taken the center stage.
Well, thank you so much, Simon. What a wonderful year it's been for Gen AI. It's been part of pretty much every conversation, be it at a water cooler or at the boardroom itself. And so today, what I'd like to do is talk to you about three issues. One, how is society thinking about Gen AI? How are businesses looking at Gen AI? And a couple of learnings and a few watch-outs when you're thinking about using Gen AI in business whilst engaging with consumers. Well, the first thing that we see is that it evokes a mix of emotions at one stage. There's a whole lot of wonder around technology and Gen AI, but it also evokes a fair degree of worry. About 71% of the population thinks that technology is very important. This is going to help us in terms of looking at a better economy, in terms of better jobs, in terms of other aspects that will help us to progress. But at the same time, there's concerns about the use of energy, the use of ethical issues, potential job cuts that could come about as such with regards to Gen AI. So you're seeing pretty much a little bit of a dichotomy here. Now, what is the promise that Gen AI holds? The promise is that of efficiency and fairness. So a lot of our audience thinks, or almost 77% thinks, that this was going to help a whole lot and change the way that we access information. It's going to be fairer. It's not going to have the same degree of biases and perhaps not discriminate against individuals. At least that is the belief. There's also a thought that perhaps it's going to save me a lot of time. That's about 55% of the population. And with that time, I would be able to, work towards the things that I truly enjoy. The economy is going to get even better than it is now. Basically, there's a belief that with Gen AI, I'll be able to come up with cooler stuff which is intelligent, which doesn't have so many drawbacks. That's going to be really powerful, turbocharge its performance, and it's pretty much going to be like the Jetsons, where things just work. But what if it wasn't the Jetsons, and if it was a different movie instead? What if we came about a scenario where, oh my gosh, we've got Skynet running loose? What if we were a scenario where the defense systems become a threat, and 60% of our audience actually feels that that is a very credible issue? So there's a fair degree of fear as such. There's fear around disinformation, about the death of privacy. The 37% of our audience feels that, well, what's actually going to happen is there's going to be a huge amount of disinformation that's out there. And also all of these products that are going to be launched, which are targeted at me, which would be personalized, but I really wonder if the organizations of the companies that are working with Gen AI would keep my data safe. And there's also a large amount of people, about 36%, who feel, well, what happens to my job? What if I lose my job? Well, this is exactly a little bit of a letdown here. When I was growing up, I thought, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have AI? It would be able to help to do my laundry and the dishes while I could spend time working on art. But that's not what's happening, isn't it? What seems to be happening is that we've got Gen AI coming up with wonderful images and videos, whereas most of us in society are looking at trying to get out of delivering our packages via the gig economy. That's not exactly what we were hoping for. Well, what exactly is business looking at, and how do they see AI? We spoke to a large number of corporate communication leaders, and they think that, well, Gen AI is definitely fundamentally going to change the way that businesses operate. They're thinking about it in the context of making communication a lot more efficient. This is almost 87% of the audience, and the estimated savings could be somewhere in the range of 500 billion. But we're also starting to see that when communication is put out and it's claimed to use Gen AI, it starts to get a fair bit of criticism. It doesn't look good. It's terrible. Oh my gosh, what were they thinking? So why exactly is that, and what should you be doing about it? Well, if what we're starting to see is that our audiences, our marketeers, are using Gen AI for various purposes, as chatbots with local searches to capture leads, to help with access, in terms of contests, in terms of for further engagement, and obviously in the context of creating content and customizations and collaborations with consumers. But how do you come about this process where you can balance efficiency and maintain genuine consumer connections and avoid a potential backlash? How do you come up with communication that resonates as such? Where do you use Gen AI, and where do you actually speak to a human? So we have a couple of learnings around that area. The first thing that we actually saw and learned was the fact that Gen AI is fabulous, or AI is fabulous in the context of information, but not really fabulous in the context of looking at empathetic connections. In one of our studies of a self-funded pilot, we put together about 146 digital twins. This was by speaking to multiple individuals, took their data, put it together, and created 146 digital twins. We then did a parallel test to evaluate what the twins said and what the humans said. And what we realized is, whilst there are a fair degree of similarity, but what the bots came up with lacked color, texture, that was just not there. It was almost sort of like looking at a sketch drawing of the Mona Lisa and not be able to experience it in all its wonder. We started to see that what AI helps you to do is not feel empathy. It actually leaves you feeling sort of empty. In this context, we started to see that what the bots came up with often looked at perhaps just the rational. It missed out on the emotional texture, which is so important when you're looking at engaging with your audiences. What we also realized is that the bots tend to skew towards the central tendency. This is the average response because pretty much they're built on a probabilistic model. As a result of which, what this does is that it leads to logical thinking and not magic. What you end up with is answers that you've already heard before, but you miss out on the vibrant fringes, which is often a fertile territory for brands to be based in. We also noticed that there's a bit of a dichotomy between personalization and being personal. Now, here's a beautiful commercial from that demonstrates this point. It's from Google, and I'm sure there's been a lot of conversation around it. This was for Germany. I'm not going to play the ad, but have a look at it on YouTube when you get a chance. It received a fair bit of criticism because it was seen as a beautiful moment where the father could spend some time with his daughter teaching. But that moment was also delegated to AI. And so whilst individuals are looking for personalized experiences, they're not willing to do so at the risk of giving up a personal touch itself. Therefore, the last thought that I'd leave you with is that whilst you need to look at AI and be impressed with regards to its capabilities, use it for its potential as such, but stay grounded in terms of maintaining those human connections to make sure that your brand and your communication remains authentic and empathetic. Back to you, Simon. You're on mute.
I think what I'm getting there is we should keep our confidence about how we can bring our own magic, perhaps. And thank you for that. Now, some of us in business may not always be confident when we're thinking about AI because there's big decisions to be made and all of that. Are there any particular points of confusion or misunderstanding you've spotted this year just working on this topic as you have been?
Well, one of the things that I've kind of noticed is that we tend to sort of get very obsessed with efficiency, and we tend to give up on what is truly important, which is empathy. And often there's a compromise that we're making, which is in the long run is hurting us. I'll give you an example in the context of communication as such. So many a times we've seen that brands have talked about releasing a piece of communication and touting the fact that, oh, this is made with AI, it's developed with AI, or it's brought to life with AI. But the idea behind it is fairly dull. And consumers don't care if it's made with AI or not. They want to know, how does it make me feel and what does it do for me? And I feel somewhere at the back of the at the head, there's also this feeling that whilst AI can dazzle me with its visual effects, what people are looking for is the appreciation of the human touch in art itself. This perhaps could explain why there's a strong critique behind certain AI-generated commercials.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that. We'll come back to you before the end. Now, you talked about being dazzled. Well, our final story of the year is about China. We've made it something of a tradition in these Keys webinars for us to have a presentation from Patrick, where he talks us through the latest trends that he's been observing in this huge and dynamic market. So, Patrick, a very warm welcome back to the Keys stage. You've set yourself the challenge today of helping us to understand China's subtle shifts. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Simon, and it's a great pleasure to be back. Yeah, this year probably is a comparatively quiet year for China. The economy stays stable, the population trend didn't change much, and basically everything seemed to be as they were. However, with that said, we still see many interesting business cases happening in the market, and some of them we've never seen in the past decade. So today, I would like to share 3 of those stories with all of you. The first one is about a rare success in the game industry, and this game is called Black Myth Wukong. This is the first AAA game from China ever, and by now it has already won 4 nominations in the TGA Awards, the Game Awards. And while we're doing this, I think they're announcing the winners right now, so we will see how well it did. At the same time, it is also a huge business success because it already sold more than 20 million in the first month. In the best estimation, they said they will sell about 1 million copies, but right now it's already 20 times more than that. And this provides a lot of hope to not just the players, but also the businesses and also investors in this industry. Another thing Wukong tells the whole country and the brands in this country is how to tell a local story to the international market better. In the past, we used a lot of elements, and that is difficult to really create empathy in a different market. However, by creating immersive experiences and lead the players to explore the whole game by themselves, actually they get better, and actually it gets easier for them to understand the different culture within several hours or several days. The core spirit you choose behind the story is also important. Unlike many traditional stories, Wukong actually represents the spirit of rebellion and freedom in China, which I guess is not usually known by the world. And even though the story was written more than 400 years ago, it still adapts well in the modern society's values. Another fun fact about it is the creator of the game. The studio is called Game Science. This guy you see on this screen, his name is Feng Ji. He left the game giant Tencent 10 years ago. Many players in China blamed the game giants that they focused too much on generating profits rather than making a good game. For similar reasons, Feng Ji left Tencent 10 years ago and started Game Science. And then he devoted all his effort into this game in the past 10 years and achieved huge success. So many people said they're actually a perfect reflection of Wukong in the modern society. The second story we want to share is in the new energy vehicle NEV industry. And Xiaomi, this brand is usually known as a consumer electronics brand. About 3 years ago, they all of a sudden announced they're going to make a car. After only 31 months, they launched their first model, Xiaomi SU7. Within 30 minutes, they already gained 50,000 bookings. This tells us how dynamic the NEV market is in today's China. We did a survey in November asking about the auto purchasers about their considerations of NEV brands in China. And on average, they consider more than 12 brands when they try to buy a car. That's surprisingly high, especially if you consider the average number is between 3 to 5 when you consider to buy an air conditioner or cosmetic brand. I guess the market will not stay like this forever, but that's what it is at the moment. It also tells us how interesting the industry can change in the past several years. Consumer electronics brands are playing a more important role in the NEV industry. In this list, where we dig out from the surveys we did last month, you can see two consumer electronics brands here. One is Xiaomi, as we mentioned. The other one actually is Huawei. You don't see Huawei's name because their car brand is called Hima, H-I-M-A, and they totally brought in a new business model in the car industry. They do not make or manufacture any vehicles by themselves. They only provide the designing platforms, the intelligent driving functions, and also interior experience designs. And they work with traditional manufacturers to bring in new brands. And the first one you see here on the list, AITO, was the first brand co-created with Hima, with Huawei's car platform. And it already ranked 3 on that list, just behind BYD and Tesla. And their manufacturer was not famous or popular at all in the past, but by this new way of working, they ranked high within only several years. The last story we want to tell is about a retail industry player called Miniso. Well, I would have to admit, in this year, many business and sectors are struggling a little bit in the domestic market. However, Miniso expanded their stores by more than 800 in the past year. And what they expanded was not just the number of stores, but also the size of the stores and the experience behind it. Miniso believed in bringing the immersive offline experience to everybody, and they are trying to create a happy experience environment so they can provide you more emotional values than traditional functional ones. And that is why they decided to expand the store so they can bring in even stronger experience. And you can see on the right is a Miniso Land they just opened in Shanghai. And we can see the other story we are not mentioning today is about a supermarket. You see a lot of people running into a place, and that's a supermarket. That supermarket is called Pangdonglai, and is sitting in the third-tier city in the middle of China, basically with no travel attractions at all. But some people actually drive about 500 meters just to that place, just to buy almost everything there. The reason behind is they're providing first-in-class services and really high-quality products. What Pangdonglai did in earlier this year was they worked with Yonghui Supermarket and renovated several of their locations. After that, Miniso saw the potential behind it and very quickly acquired Yonghui with all cash. Miniso said they really believe in the future of retail in China in the next decade, especially if you can provide good immersive experience, as we mentioned, and also unique services and high-quality products. It seems that after decades of soaring e-commerce, now the offline retail is coming back to the center of the stage in China. Those three stories may not seem that huge, as the ones we mentioned in the past, but hopefully we can quote an ancient saying in China and tell you why we chose them. The saying came from more than 3,000 years ago, and it says, by observing the subtle changes, hopefully you can foresee the profound trends. And hopefully that's also what we are doing here at Ipsos to help you, to provide you insights to look into the future. And thank you, Simon. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for that tour de force and three really interesting and contrasting examples, and particularly thinking about your subtle changes point. I was really struck by what you were observing in the retail sector and the kind of emphasis on experience and products and customer service that you were seeing in what you might call the traditional bricks and mortar aspect of the retail market. We often, when we're thinking about China and observing it, talk about the online experience for shopping. How is that adapting in the current context?
It's really interesting to see how the convergent commerce is happening in online environment. Basically, every e-commerce platform is trying to build up a content community to provide you entertaining content. At the same time, all the social media is trying to add a shopping cart. And the most updated trend is they see the only thing they cannot provide comparing to the offline stores is the immersive experience. But then some people start to ask, why cannot we provide that? And they started to build up pop-up online stores to provide like a playground experience online. And you can play, you can have fun on there, and then you can find products you like, and then you make a purchase. So basically, they are providing everything and also trying to integrate the offline experience, copy that offline experience into an online environment.
So our convergent commerce journey continues, let's say, onto the next station. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and really important insights. And we'll be coming back to some of these topics next year. I wanted to thank everybody on the call for being with us this year. We've written up a number of the stories that we've covered today, including from China, by the way, in the new Ipsos Almanac, which is live now. So do take a look at that as you perhaps reflect on the year just gone and start to look ahead. All of the slides and the video recording will of course be available to you to follow up and reflect on if that's helpful for you. And of course, we're looking forward to being with you next year. And our first show of the year will see us looking ahead. We'll be looking at one of the topics Patrick mentions actually, which is around electric vehicles and how they fit into where we're going more broadly on mobility. We'll be looking at ESG and where that is after an interesting year. And we'll also be looking at work, the world of work and how that is changing. So we're looking forward to being with you in January. But for now, thank you, Patrick. Thank you to all of our speakers for being with us. And thank you, our clients, for being with us this year. All the very best.